So we're good?
See a thumbs
Yes.
up? Okay, great, thanks.
Welcome, everybody. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Tompkins County Development Corporation. We're going to go in reverse order today for June 14th, 2023. And first item of business is privilege of the floor. I'm happy to receive comment on either IDA items or Development Corporation items, or I will call privilege of the floor again when we get to the IDA. So seeing none, let's just proceed to the Development Corporation business. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, first item of business is the kitchen feasibility study funding request. And just prior to the meeting, Tom Knipe informed me that he just had a few updates he can give us, and I'd invite him forward just to speak very briefly.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks for considering this item. I just wanted to update you on some things that have occurred since I last came and visited you. First, we have applied for an Appalachian Regional Commission grant. It's actually a pre-application. We'll know if we're invited for a full application within the next 2 weeks for phase 2 support for the kitchen. The grant application assumes that the kitchen is established and provides additional funding for technical assistance, startup incubation support, and also some money for some additional equipment. We hope we'll be successful with that, and those monies would come in about a year from now if we are. Second, on the recommendation of Heather and the board, we sent our 5-year operating pro forma and cash flow projection to the Small Business Development Center. They reviewed that as a client and with us as clients and provided comment back. We made a couple of small tweaks to the pro forma based on their advice. That was a change to the assumption around fringe and a change around in the assumption around inflation. Otherwise, they confirmed the general validity of the approach. We do have a new pro forma based on their advice that we can share with you. Third, we have an immediate next step that we're working on now for the project is to form the entities that will own the kitchen and to negotiate the lease agreement and the operating agreements. We've identified funding within an existing budgeted allocation at the City of Ithaca within our small scale manufacturing initiative to do that. So that solves a chicken and egg problem with that. And then finally, we'll be giving Katie Borgella, County Planning Director, a tour of the kitchen tomorrow at 2 p.m. It's very last minute notice, but if any board members are interested in attending that tour, Katie sits on the project review committee for Southern Tier A, which is reviewing the Appalachian Regional Commission grant application. And so we thought it would be good for her to see the space, ask her questions, and for us to be able to share additional information with Katie so that she can represent the project to that decision-making body. But it's a great opportunity for anybody from the board, if you'd like to come along for the ride, to meet with us. And if you're not able to make it but are still interested in that, we can find another time. So those are my just brief updates. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Ann, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask quick, can you tell us details of the tour, when and where?
It's at 2 o'clock at 700 West Buffalo Street in the former, the space.
2 p.m. Okay.
And we'll likely meet in the parking lot on the Buffalo Street side rather than the Court Street side, which is now a boat sales business. The kitchen's in the center of the building.
Okay, Deborah.
Yeah, I wasn't here last month, so I didn't have the benefit of your presentation. So this may sound like a really silly question, but when you talk about we, who is we?
Great. The Friends of the Ithaca Farmers Market is the entity that is leading the charge on the funding requests. The president of the Friends of Ithaca Farmers Market is Monica Roth. And we've convened a team that is actively working on implementation. That team consists of Monica, also Jan Norman from the Friends of the Ithaca Farmers Market and Farmers Market Board of Directors, Dominic Recchio, who is also Communications Director for Tompkins County, but is working with us on his own time on this project. Rod Rotundi, who's here today, who is the consultant who's been working with us on the feasibility analysis. And Chuck Schwerin is also still involved in the project and helping move it forward. We've also received advice and check in regularly with two folks who kind of represent the opportunity to raise capital from private investors. And Jerry Dietz attended the meeting last month, I believe, and spoke on behalf. And we're also working with a gentleman by the name of Brandon Wright, who's another interested private investor.
Thank you.
And Carrie Pollock is the attorney who we've been communicating with about the agreements and the legal formation.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions for Tom? Heather?
I don't have questions for Tom, but
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
some
Maybe you could just share what we've done since our last meeting in terms of identifying two different possible consultants to help the Development Corporation.
So I'm so sorry that I had to leave right after 4 o'clock and wasn't able to participate in the rest of the discussion around this project. I did watch the video of the meeting, and I think understand the salient highlights, and I would say that it sounded like, there was, widespread support to try and figure out a way to support this project. So what Rich and I did is we met with Russ Gensel and sort of talked through a recommended path forward. That's why you'll see it's on the Development Corporation agenda and not on the IDA agenda. As you may recall, the Development Corporation can be a little bit more flexible in what it uses its funding for. So we did agree, Russ and Rich and I anyway, that this is probably the better place to do this. And then the next thing that we did is talked about hiring a third-party consultant to review the feasibility analysis, the assumptions, the pro forma, the startup costs. So I reached out to two firms, received two proposals, which Rich and I reviewed. I know there was some discussion at the last meeting about, particularly John, you had some sentiments that we were putting them through more hoops than we generally would a project. And I just wanted to sort of address that. The IDA reserves the right to require third-party analysis, to require a market study, to require financial feasibility study. In past years, the IDA did rely on third parties to do that, usually a separate consulting firm at the cost of the applicant. It states in our certifications page that if there's any additional reviews, one year we had to do the environmental review for a project, it's at the cost of the applicant. But so I wouldn't say it's out of the ordinary. There's always some sort of financial review that happens internally with staff with the project. When you have a $30 million manufacturing expansion, it's a little bit different than, a $1 million project. We also internally do sort of that analysis on the return on investment. It used to be a third party that did that at the cost of the applicant. So I would just sort of say I don't think it's really out of the scope and the norm of the IDA. I understand that this project's a little bit different. It's a little bit smaller. I always say that the IDA is a great tool at scale. And sometimes it's really not for a really tiny project, although, it's still a great project. So what we did is we reviewed the two proposals to have someone come in and do a third-party analysis. We received a proposal from Camoin Associates. They have offices in Saratoga and a couple of other states in the Northeast, and then MRB Group, which some of them are located in New York State and then outside of New York State. So Rich and I reviewed that, both of those proposals, and we'd like to recommend that we use MRB Group. I think part of what we both liked about their proposal was that it provided more opportunity for a little bit of back and forth with that group and the commercial kitchen group. So what we'd like to recommend is that we go ahead and have the Development Corporation pick up the cost of that. The proposed cost is $8,000 to do that review. And then once that analysis is done, hopefully July, we can bring it back in July. If the Development Corporation then wants to move forward, my recommendation would be that you approve the funding contingent on some of those other items that you had discussed at the last meeting, that there's an investment structure, a payback plan details in place, 100% of the investor match has been received so that the Development Corporation money is the last in, public money usually is, that there's an organizational structure in place and a signed lease so that, the IDA could, if they had some comfort with the study, say, okay, we'll set aside the money, and then they could go ahead and work on all these other things.
I think there was one other item, which was the state approvals of the facility as a commercial kitchen.
Health Department?
Yeah, I think New York State Health Department
Health
has.
Department. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are
Ag and
some.
Markets C20 license.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
okay.
there is an Ag and Market C20 license for any producers, and then if there were food trucks or caterers, they would be under the Health Department. Is that correct?
Right. The individual operators will have their own license, but the kitchen needs to have its own license.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd just add that the other potential consultant was a little bit cheaper, but the county has worked with MRB recently, and I was very impressed with the work they did. And there was more opportunity for iterative back and forth, which I think makes sense in this context. The other one was, I think, at $5,000.
Yeah, and Mike Andolo at MRB Group did the very first cost-benefit analysis for this IDA, probably 2006-ish, right before I came to TCIDA. So he has worked with the IDA and other IDAs, and our cost-benefit analysis that we were using last year, the year before, was a product of MRB as well. So they do have some familiarity with IDAs in general.
Did I see a hand up? John, did you have a?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the timeline of the various different, requirements that were just outlined there and how that relates to the actual procurement of the equipment. I know if you're building out a commercial kitchen for a restaurant, they won't give you any of your approvals until the equipment's all sitting there and they can come look at it in situ. Do you know how, this timeline would impact your project, and if there are any concerns about, meeting these particular requirements before the funding's released or anything like that?
I had the same thought in listening to Heather's recap of the contingencies, and I think that, generally speaking, the group that's working on the kitchen project doesn't have a problem with the spirit of the contingencies and the intention behind it. Obviously, all of those things need to be in place for the project to move forward. I do think you're right that when we drill down on some of the specifics, for example, I cued in on the words, having the money in hand. If we could modify that to the money pledged, and that would be through, formally pledging through signatures on a term sheet, et cetera, that would be good, because, the way that the money will actually come in may depend in part upon, the investors, and it may come, in rounds, but it would be pledged ahead of time. And yes, Rod would be better positioned to speak to, what the requirements to apply for a C20 license would be. I assume that you're right, that there need to be some inspections with equipment in place to actually secure that license. And so if there's a slightly lower threshold that is evidence of the likelihood of, approval of the kitchen, Rod has spoken with Mike Wolf, the regional permitting officer for Ag and Markets. They're familiar with the kitchen. We'd probably be able to get some type of affidavit, but absent the equipment being in place, which we would use TCDC money to support, we may not be able to get the license. So I do think that having the flexibility to tweak some of those contingencies would allow the project to move forward.
Okay. And then I think I have Todd, Ann, and Deborah.
So the timing question, though, also, there's some concern about the timing and how that impacts, your ability to secure the building and, the potential that it might be leased to someone else. If we wait a month before you get the approval, does that impact the feasibility of the project?
I have always thought that it would be much stronger to go to private investors, with the commitment with those contingencies of the TCDC. So from my mind, the sooner is always better, because it does trigger us to be able to move forward with the asks of private investors and all of the other pieces, that we need to be working on now to move forward quickly with the project. So a sooner decision, I believe, would allow for a sooner opening of the kitchen.
And John, just to let you know, my preference would be to ask a board member to propose that we approve today contingent on these things happening, rather than waiting and then approving in July.
Okay,
So
yeah,
that
I
we can
like
give
that.
direction today.
Yep, yeah.
But, okay. Yeah,
I would just caution, what happens, I'm just going to play devil's advocate, not that this is going to happen, but what if the feasibility analysis comes through and they say, we have some serious concerns about this project moving forward. You've already committed your funding.
Contingent upon.
I had
Yes.
another
study.
Yeah,
question.
no, it would be contingent, and that would be an awkward, difficult thing, but
would be.
we would have to do it if we have to do it. But I think there's a time issue here. We don't want to sit on our hands. So that, as I said, that's my preference, but love to hear viewpoints of those on the committee. Todd, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm in favor of this project, and I really don't see why we need this feasibility study. I think from the information we had last time, I'm comfortable with going forward. I don't think we need to spend that money in that feasibility study. It's going to be an incubator to create more companies and employ more people, which is exactly what we want in this county. I'm in favor of it just the way it was before.
Okay,
I hate
and?
to see you get held up because of a timeliness.
Right.
So I'm thinking of a kind of a compromise, because so I like the idea, if we're requiring the feasibility study, that the board's paying for it. I look at this as, hopefully this will be helpful to the project. So what I would propose is that we commit this money contingent on the feasibility study from MRB, if that's who we are for sure choosing, and a timeline. I don't feel comfortable in saying what that timeline is in these other, things that we might put in there, because MRB, I trust them that they're going to say, well, yeah, here's, this is where I would put the money in, and these are the ducks that I'd want to have, in a row, that we absolutely need to do that. So for instance, we don't need the certification from Ag and Markets before we give them money, as far as I'm concerned. I've had a commercial kitchen before, and you do all these things, that you do all this, and then you have them come and you hope that you've done everything correctly, and if not, you change some things. So I would do it based on that and not have everything set in stone at this time, because I think that's part of the information we're going to get from MRB.
Okay, Deborah?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with getting a feasibility study, especially in light of the concerns that Heather expressed at last month's meeting, which I read the minutes. I wish we'd had a video. That would have been helpful. The timing pieces are difficult. And honestly, I've never tried to put something like this together before, but it would seem to me that the contingencies that matter are the feasibility study reports and having the contractual obligations of the parties that are going to be using and leasing, so that we know what all the financing pieces are. I think once you have those signed contracts, it doesn't really matter when we actually release the money, as long as those people are on the hook. And we know that this thing's going to fly. So those would be the two contingencies that would be most important to me.
Anybody else? Heather?
So I've worked for many years managing a loan fund. We approve loans at IAED that have contingencies. When the group is comfortable, they say, here's the contingencies. It's administrative. When the contingencies are met, you disperse the funds. I've sat on a number of grant committees over the years that sort of do the same thing. They say, you have to have these ducks in a row, and it's administrative. The funds are dispersed when a project meets those contingencies. So this body doesn't have really, I think, that experience because the IDA doesn't manage loans in that way. But I think that you could very easily do something similar to that.
Okay, well, listening to the membership, it sounds like the motion would be to approve the allocation of $150,000 to the shared commercial kitchen project, subject to us funding a study through the MRB group for the cost of $8,000 and getting a report back. Presumably, we would reconsider if it had negative information in it. But the other contingencies would be execution of a lease for the space and securing pledges from the other investors in the project. And I think we were saying we don't want to have the contingency of getting Ag and Markets approval because we have a chicken and egg problem there. Does that articulate what we've talked about? If so, could I get somebody to move that?
I think also wasn't a contingent on the entity formation, because I believe.
Oh, okay, and entity formation.
And the lease.
Right,
I
I
said
think
the
you
lease.
mentioned the lease. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, so if the entity is not formed, are we actually, we're giving this to the Friends of the Farmers Market?
Yes, one of the agreements that is being worked out now is a fiscal sponsorship agreement for the project with the Friends of the Ithaca Farmers Market. So they will be in the position to
They're the
accept
sponsor.
funds.
Now, are we, so, I mean, right, in other cases, we've purchased equipment and then leased it to a project sponsor. Because this is a nonprofit, are we able to just make this as a grant, or is this, like, what's the actual structure of how we distribute the money?
I believe the Development Corporation has the ability to grant funds. So our recommendation was to just grant the funds.
We got counsel here today? We got counsel here today, right? Russ, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, there's much more flexibility, John, within the LDC than the IDA. I know we've had numerous conversations, we being the board and our team, about the IDA granting and loaning money, but there's more flexibility within the LDC.
Okay,
There's
so
not the limitations that the IDA has. But you could put whatever contingencies upon the granting or loaning of that money you want. It's just easier to do it through the LDC.
Right. And I mean, I guess to my colleagues here, is it like, are we talking about making a grant? Are we talking about purchasing equipment with a $0 lease? Or like, what, do we have a preference
I
around
thought
how
we
that's
were making a
structured?
grant.
We certainly could buy the equipment ourselves and let them use it. We'd have some security there if the whole thing went bust, but
I've talked to a couple of bankers, and you'd probably get 20 cents on the dollar, and
Yeah.
you'd have to pay someone to buy it, to sell it.
Yeah.
So
Let's not.
So we're just talking about a grant to specifically the Friends of the Farmers Market. I'm just trying to make sure we have good language
Yeah.
for our resolution here, right? A
Right.
grant to the Friends of the
Okay.
Farmers Market in the amount of $150,000, contingent upon a satisfactory study from MRB Group, which will be paid for by the LDC, the execution of a lease for the space, and the securement of commitment from investors.
I wonder if it's friendly if you put that, the securing the investment from the investors equal to the startup costs. I
Right,
mean,
so
making it
all
clear how
funding-
much. I
right.
mean, if they go out and raise $10,000, but their startup costs are
Right.
$300.
Well, it's not, is there loan money from somewhere too, or is this all investor capital plus this grant is what it takes? So there are no other sources that are going
Those are
in?
the two sources for phase one, and the amount to raise from private capital is $200,000.
Right. So I mean, yeah, I think, so 200,000 and
Well,
private
I
capital
have
commitments
yet
there
to
or something.
see where $200,000 or $350,000 is their startup costs. So my preference would be that you say equal to the established startup costs.
Yeah, and this is rough, sorry to chime in again, but as I mentioned last month, if I recall, the board has to decide, do you want to be first in or last in? And I know it's a timing issue for the project to show that they have the support. So that's just a business decision the board has to make, whether you want to be first in, last in, whether it's a grant or a loan, and just be aware of the fact that if, and I'm not suggesting this would ever occur, that if it blows up, that money's gone.
I think we would like to be last in, was the consensus.
Well, I mean,
But I thought that was a problem because, as John pointed out, they would have difficulty getting their license.
right, I mean, we want all of the funding to be committed, right, in writing
Yeah.
somehow, but
Yeah.
not necessarily received. So that was sort of the,
Yeah, that was
it's
my.
like-
Yeah, and John, we can do that. That's easy to do. You commit to put it in on certain contingencies,
right.
and then hopefully that will help the developer secure the other financing. And then if the contingencies are met, then we scratch the check, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Okay,
I'll go ahead and move that.
okay. Deborah?
Before we go there, we're making this as a grant to the Friends of the Ithaca Farmers Market. Should we not specify in what capacity they will be the grantee, i.e. as the financial or fiscal sponsor of this particular project?
Point.
Why don't we restate all of this so that it's clear to everybody? And I think that's a
Help
good.
a lot if we had it in writing.
Yeah, yes. So this would be a grant to the Friends of the Farmers Market as a fiscal sponsor of the Shared Commercial Kitchen Project. And the Development Corporation is allocating $150,000 to the project, contingent upon several different items. One is a study to be completed by the MRB group at our cost of $8,000, and satisfactory recommendations from the MRB group to be determined by the Development Corporation, execution of a lease for the premises by the fiscal sponsor or an entity to be formed, and securing pledges in the necessary amount to pay the startup costs from other investors, and receiving those pledges prior to our payment of any money.
Pledges in the form of signed contracts.
Pledges in the forms of signed contracts. Was there anything else?
I'll move it.
And
I think
we're securing 158, really, right? So it's 158 to be spent, 8,000 on the study, 150 on the, I think that's a little bit clearer.
Okay,
So, I mean,
okay. Well, I'm going to say John moved and you'll second?
I'll second.
Okay, so that's on the floor. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion?
I would just like to clarify that the 8,000 is not going to the Friends of the Farmers Market. That's going directly for that
Correct.
feasibility study.
Yes. I guess I would just speak in summary that I believe this project provides an opportunity for the Development Corporation to do something substantial for small business startups in our community and to address food issues in our community. I think it's an exciting project for all those reasons. It takes advantage of an existing facility that is set up to do this at what it would be a substantial cost otherwise if you were starting from a greenfield. I have been in the space. If anybody is available tomorrow at 2 o'clock to go see it, it's worth looking at. This is an opportunity to take advantage of. So for all those reasons, I think this is a worthwhile project to pursue. Todd?
Yeah, again, I agree with Richard. I think it's a real good project, and I'd like to see this kind of thinking outside the box, as far as a way of creating more companies and employing more people. So I give you a lot of credit for that.
Okay, anybody else? We'll call the roll. If we're ready to vote. Doug?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So congratulations, and we move forward from here.
Thank you.
This is exciting.
We'll keep you updated. Appreciate your support.
Okay. I do not have a chair's report. There is the staff report with the first quarter 2023 financial report on page 2 of the agenda. Heather, did you have anything you wanted to speak to us on that?
Nothing to speak to. I think we had provided it at the last meeting or the meeting before that, the last TCDC meeting, and we just didn't have time to talk about it. So that's our financial.
Do we need a
quarterly
motion to
financial
approve, or
report.
is informational?
Nope, just
Okay.
informational.
And then we have minutes from our March 8th, 2023 board meeting. Could I get a motion on the minutes? John moves, Ann seconds. Questions or comments on the minutes? I'll call the vote. Duck?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. All right, any other business to come before the Development Corporation? Seeing none, I will call adjournment of the Development Corporation meeting. Thank you. And I will open the meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency for June 14th, 2023. Welcome. And our first item of business is privilege of the floor. We have some written comments, and we also have a speaker who's with us today. Why don't we have, I'd invite Teresa Alt forward first to address the board or the agency.
Okay, sounds like it's okay. I'm Teresa Auld, 206 Eddy Street, City of Ithaca. Back in December, Brian Crandall wrote in The Voice about VISM's plans for the Citizen on the site of the former Joe's Restaurant at 602 West Buffalo Street. VISM was then talking about middle income or workforce housing and about 110 units. Now, the plan comes to the IDA and it's down to 80 units. More significantly, it's no longer the middle income or workforce housing that we need in the city. Now it's market rate housing, the kind we don't need more of. Workforce housing is relegated to that $5,500 per unit fee that won't be paid for several years. I see from your overview that over the next 10 years, the amount of abated taxes will somewhat exceed the amount of actually paid new taxes. The current Citizen is not what the city needs. CTAP doesn't force you to subsidize it out of our taxes. You have said no to the city before, and you can say no today. You, the IDA, should be supporting better paying jobs in the city and housing that is affordable to the people who work here now. VISM says they need the subsidy because construction costs have risen, but that is not the taxpayer's problem. Developers are supposed to take on the risks. Unwise subsidies have led to increased land prices downtown, and this has made it nearly impossible to build anything affordable. Please stop aggravating this problem. And we don't need more gentrification in the West End. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Is there anybody else here who wishes to address the IDA? I would proceed to the written comments. Let's see, we received from Todd Kurzweil. Go first. Let's see. Todd Kurzweil of the City of Ithaca. Will there be any percentage? This is an email to various individuals at the city, to me as the chair of the IDA, to Heather, and to Gary Ferguson of the DIA. Will there be any percentage of retail in the new addition to the Rothschilds building, AKA the Ithacan? I don't see retail designation usage in the site planning application or retail noted as a use anywhere in the formal paperwork. Please show primary source documents if I'm incorrect. Please, each entity acknowledge receipt, formal record, Uncle Toddy, Ithaca and Flea Market. Do you want to read one from Norman Adalwitz?
I have Norman Adalwitz. No, 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 1,000 times no. Enough of giving abatements for building projects like this. If the project is good enough for a developer to make profits from, it's good enough for the developer to entirely pay for building it. County and city need to stop giving tax relief for housing projects that benefit no one other than the developer and people who can afford to pay the apartment prices. 80 residential units with none being affordable. Past the 150 temporary construction jobs, there's no benefit to the county or city to justify subsidizing developers who have created an industry for their own benefit. Where does it end? And the subject on this was VISM's latest tax abatement request at 602 West Buffalo.
Then I have a comment from Tim Lillard. The citizen development is missing at least 3 things. I read Brian Crandall's description in the Ithaca Voice of VISM's plan for 602 West Buffalo Street, and he gives a citation, and I'm very grateful for his keeping the people in the loop. There are 3 things missing in VISM's plan, which should alert all readers that additional costs will be borne by the community because VISM didn't attend to them. I know that we need more housing in the area, but everyone recognizes that owner-occupied is preferable to rental. Shoveling money to entice corporations to build and collect rent off large apartment complexes instead of encouraging the building of smaller co-ops and houses is a mystery to me. All projects need to be good neighbors, but VISM's plan is not, in spite of their ridiculous name for it. First of all, VISM has begged off from serving low-income residents. They've turned low-income residents into a cost and would offload that to the community. So for a start, they are not willing to recognize all citizens. It's also a warning not to expect any landlord leniency when hard times come again, as they inevitably will. By the way, it's odd that they seek to rent to such a particular segment of the population, mid-market workforce, parens 80 to 120% area median income. I can only speculate as to what they mean by it. Secondly, am I the only one who sees this as a missed opportunity for installing solar panels? A 5-story building at that corner would not now and is unlikely to ever be in the shade. Its 92,800 square feet of flat roof could generate a significant portion of the energy demand it will add to the local grid, especially valuable for AC in the expanding and increasingly hot summers. Solar on the roof would diminish the project's accentuation of the urban heat island effect. Solar electricity is cheaper than that from fossil fuels and allows us to retire dirty old expensive power plants, which is what we must do to reduce global warming. To not put up solar panels when it's so easy to do so keeps us speeding to disaster and represents a failure of both conscience and intelligence. It would reduce the cost of electricity for the building. Panels on rooftops means sparing open land, be it farm, forest, or recreational. Being on the roof, it would be inaccessible to vandals and thieves. Our so-called national grid is not integrated and won't accommodate many of the windmills and solar farms we need. And it's slow-going and expensive, even in the rural parts of Tompkins County, to get access. Meanwhile, Ithaca is smack in the middle of the local grid, where panels could be linked in easily. If the Tompkins Public Library could do it, so can they. There are government incentives for solar. By the way, for all the buildings recently built and still going up with acres of rooftops and large demands for electricity, I'm not seeing or hearing anything about solar panels, but perhaps I'm just uninformed. All these builders' projects have rooftops, so why don't they routinely design them for rooftop solar? All cities have poor residents, so why don't they routinely design residential projects to include them? Why do we expect anything different? Thirdly, the most obvious fault, the plan provides 26 parking spaces for 80 residences where there is already a shortage of parking. The streets to the east, as far as Washington Park, will be jammed, and those residents will know exactly whom to blame. Design is VISM's gatekeeper. It keeps solar electricity generation out. It keeps lower income people out. It sheds as many costs to the community as it can. Overall efficiency or concern for the community itself seem to receive no consideration in the process. Bad design is simpler for them. It makes projects more profitable for them. Government authorities are put in the position of asking VISM to do the whole design properly, so VISM's manager, Butcher, put out a lot of fluff to indicate that they could do only this plan and only if it comes with big rebates in order to lower your expectations. And she tried to do your thinking for you when she said, without the financial support provided by this CTAP program, this project will be unfeasible, and the city and New York State will be passing on the opportunity for development that will help advance the so-needed West End revitalization. Forget about giving VISM any CTAP rebates for this plan, for we will need that money and more to make up for its inefficiency and faults. Better to give public funds to nonprofits to do it instead, and let VISM either redesign their project in order to get rebates or walk away. Tim Lillard, Newfield, New York. And then he goes on to say, we will have representative democracy when anyone can propose law, everyone can vote on everything, and legislators act in accord with their districts. Are there any other comments for the IDA? Okay. Are there any additions to the agenda? We'll proceed to business, and in fact, it's 602 West Buffalo Street application, and I believe we have some representatives with us. Julia Butcher is here, and I think Todd, if you'd like to come up.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
So I need to, I've had a long discussion with Russ on this, so I don't have a legal conflict, but I have a conflict of appearance, so I'm going to step away and recuse myself on this.
All right, we'll look forward to you coming back. Welcome.
How you guys doing?
Good.
So you have in your application packet, or in your packet, an application for the 602 West Buffalo project, community benefit memo and incentive calculations. There's also a cover letter to the application. This project is eligible under the CTAP program. It fits all of the eligibility guidelines. I have reviewed the pro formas, and it does meet the financial need incentive, which is a little bit bigger incentive than the regular incentive. The project does have its site plan approvals and all of its city approvals in hand. I will note, and it is in the application now, that they've requested to pay the housing payment over the first 3 years of operation, which would require a 20% additional fee paid at closing.
And just for the record, if anybody's looking at our agenda, page 4 has a cost-benefit analysis spreadsheet, and part of the page was cut off. And so it excluded the tax abated from the school district, which over the 10-year period of the abatement would be $1,444,610. And the total taxes abated was cut off as well. It's shown elsewhere on the sheet, I believe, but that number is $2,957,552. Todd, would you like to present anything to the IDA?
I'm Todd Fox. I'm the founder and CEO of VISM Development for the project. I'm actually going to hand this off to Julia, who is going to do the presentation. If that's okay?
That's fine. Julia, welcome.
Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I will share my screen. It looks like the host will need to allow me to share, please.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're here today to talk to you about the Citizen. First, we just wanted to talk a little bit about VISM. We're a local in Ithaca with a in-house market and affordable housing project. Currently, we have 11 projects.
Julia?
You're
Can you hear
breaking
me
up.
well? Sorry.
Yeah, you're breaking up. I'm going to try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I'll start over. Let me know if connection is not good, but.
We will.
Thank you. So I was just thinking about a local with a track record of student housing, market, and affordable housing project. We developed our first 9% HGR project. We currently have 11 projects under development and 19 properties under management. Ithaca is our sister company and property management firm. Upon the completion of the Citizen, they will be taking on the management side. As a company is and has always been very invested in the community. Now just moving on to the project itself. The Citizen will be located at 602 West Buffalo Street at Ithaca's West End area. The site is located within walking and biking distance to many of Ithaca's beloved amenities and with great access to public transportation. Additionally, the project is located in a New York State qualified opportunity zones, which are designated distressed communities where New York State wants to encourage economic development, job creation, increased access to goods and services, and improve quality of life for residents in these communities. As a quick overview, the Citizen will be a primarily residential mixed-use development that has a bit over 90,000 square feet of gross buildable area, 80 residential units, 26 covered parking spaces, 2 retail spaces, picnic area at the north end away from the busy intersection, planned landscaping, and a community room. The project has already received, as mentioned, the final site plan approval and a negative declaration for the seeker. For a broad overview of the community benefits that the Citizen will bring, we believe that the project will help accomplish the city's goal of creating a more vibrant and economically prosperous West End neighborhood. It will create new indirect jobs by adding the 2,250 square feet of retail space, and it will improve the quality of life of the West End and the waterfront by redeveloping a parcel that currently contains a blighted building into high-quality modern housing. Looking a little bit closer on the community benefits brought to this site, the project will help enhance the pedestrian experience at the busy intersection by adding 300 square feet of physical space to the existing streetscape, as pictured in the slide. This area was removed from the commercial spaces in order to help create a better space for the community. The project will also contribute to making this area greener and more pedestrian friendly by adding planned landscape and seating areas, both covered and uncovered. We believe this will bring more comfort and enhance the public realm, be it for the people using the space or just passing by. The project will be generating approximately 150 jobs during the construction period, and a total of 3 permanent indirect jobs are expected to be created through VISM's property management, Livermore Ithaca. In terms of the overall costs, the total overall development costs of the projects are a little bit above $26 million. The estimated value of the pilot would be a little short of $3 million. The estimated value sales tax incentive would be around $760,000. Estimated value of mortgage tax incentive, $50,000. And the calculation of percentage of project costs financed by public sector would be 14.27%. To conclude, we are requesting a 10-year TCIDA abatement in order to make the project financially viable. With this, we'll conclude our presentation. Thank you so much for your time. And Todd and myself are available if you have any questions, further questions.
Thank you. Okay. Deborah.
Okay, so this is the first project that I've seen come in its original state in my short tenure on the IDA, so I have several questions. The first one I had is that you mentioned that this project is going to be located in one of the state's qualified opportunity zones. What, if any, incentives is the state providing?
There's incentives to investors for capital gains. So if they have capital gains, they can defer the capital gains, essentially. And rather than paying the taxes to like IRS and a portion of the state, they're able to reinvest those funds into, underdeveloped, and economically deprived areas, which is to, incentivize people to invest capital, essentially.
So Visum would be the investor, for example?
No, we raise capital from like limited partners. So like we go out, we have investors that come, invest money into the projects.
Okay, thank you. And then on page 4 of your application, page 10 of our agenda packet, there's a sentence that says, the project is unlikely to raise private investor capital and bank financing without the CTAP abatement, which in such scenario is predicted to achieve a sub 10% cash-on-cash return. Which scenario, with or without the CTAP?
I mean, without the CTAP, it's not an economically viable project.
Because it's sub 10%.
Right, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't get financing from a bank. You're not going to get financing from investors, so.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add that with the incentive, it's still below 10%.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. And then, this is just for my own understanding, your budget of the project costs and financing doesn't specifically include anything for demolition of the, is that put somewhere else in here?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
It's in the construction costs.
It's in the construction costs. Okay, thank you. And then one final point. Julia mentioned that Livermore Ithaca would take over the management, and that, I guess, assumes that Visum or whatever the entity that's formed to actually own the property will continue to own it.
Correct.
What happens, and this may be more of a question for the IDA than for Todd, what happens if they decide to sell this property before the 10 years is up? Because I seem to recall we had a fecal hurricane when another building downtown sold.
The pilot would automatically be terminated unless the applicant came back to the IDA and asked them to transfer it to a new owner.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I got.
Okay.
Russ, do we have a legal mechanism to, if that does happen, that we could, would it be like a lien against it has to be satisfied before it can be sold?
If they want to sell the property that is subject to the benefit of a pilot, and they want that pilot to continue, and those benefits to continue, they have to come back to the board for approval. Otherwise, the property goes back on the tax rolls.
And it's a lease back, so we lease the property from them and then lease it back to them, essentially.
Correct. That's right, John.
But there's no clawback of the incentives that have already been allowed. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? I had a couple questions. The letter that I read was arguing you should put solar panels on the roof. You don't have 92,000 square feet on the roof. That's the stack of the pancakes, right? How many square feet do you have on the roof? Do you know? What's one-fifth?
Divided by 5.
About 20,000, roughly.
Yeah, 18,000 and change.
Have you thought about putting solar panels
I
up there?
mean, we've looked into the past on previous projects. Like, we work with Tatum, and it's always advised that it's just not feasible. That's I think why you don't see it a lot. I mean, I know the library is a different scenario because it's a government-owned building, so it's an opportunity to do something like that. I think in the past, what we were told by consultants is that it's more economically viable to use like solar farms, but we've just haven't done it because it just hasn't made sense on a project yet, so.
Okay. And my other question regarded the parking spaces. I'm cognizant we don't do land use planning, and we don't want to put you through that process again, but it was interesting to me that with 80 apartments, it was approved with 26 spaces. And do you anticipate people trying to park elsewhere in the neighborhood?
I think the reason the city originally zoned, I mean, there's no parking requirement, period. So we actually didn't have to put a single parking space, per zoning. I think part of that has to do with like access to public transportation. I think the city was always anticipating that people that would kind of be living in these neighborhoods would hopefully not have as many cars per ratio of units. We actually chose as the developer to add parking. I mean, we could have put housing on that ground floor, which would have been more profitable, but we felt from like a marketability standpoint that it actually made sense to have kind of the ratio that we had. And that's why we did the parking. So it's hard to say what percentage of people are going to inevitably have cars once they're living there, but I mean, that was kind of like our reasoning for doing it in the first place. But I mean, it wasn't a requirement. I mean, nothing on the West End is a requirement to have parking, so.
And I note that New York State is talking about making some changes to traffic patterns around this block with making this section between Fulton and Meadow Street of Buffalo one way going east. Would that impact your project in any way?
I don't think it would impact the project in any way. We are going to have some ground floor retail. I don't know how that would affect, traffic flow and if people are willing to pay more per square foot because of like the traffic flow. But I think the project in general, I don't see it impacting at all.
I see this picture that's up on the screen. Is there going to be entry and exit onto Meadow Street as well?
No, the entry is on Buffalo Street.
There'll be one.
Yeah, I think this was just kind of like a visual so you could get a different perspective of it, but there's no entryway back there.
Okay.
We don't have access, so that's not our property. So there's a fire lane, so the only person that can actually access through is the fire department, so they could fight a fire from the back of the building or the front of the building, but we're not allowed to have residents, access, through that parking lot.
The parking lot is part of the TCA, which is the house right
Okay.
there.
Okay. And then finally, I know we're about to get new flood maps issued. Is this property within is it subject to the insurance requirements for the new flood designation?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of actually dodged a bullet by putting parking on the ground floor because we could have done housing, and if we had done housing, we'd have been in a very different scenario. There is going to have to be additional insurance for the retail space, so that's going to impact our bottom line because, we're going to have to offset the rent. I mean, if we have a tenant coming that's spending an extra $15,000 a year for insurance, they're probably not going to be able to pay us. We're going to have to reduce our rent. But for the most part, the ground floor is parking, so it's kind of, there's a benefit.
I note that a lot of the areas that are subject to the flooding, if the dredging occurred in the inlet, they would then be in compliance. Is that the case for this property?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Duxon.
Just a couple of notes and then a question. So the parking facility, as Todd mentioned, the city has eliminated parking requirements in some parts of the city, and I'm personally hoping to get rid of more of them. But this is an excellent example of instead of forcing some arbitrary minimum number of parking spaces, a developer using some amount of history of experience. INHS has a ton of experience in this too, where they see pretty low parking utilization. Something that reflects reality rather than, again, some elected's arbitrary determination of how much someone should build. As to the one-way couplets, city transportation staff and most of the electeds, maybe all of them, are fiercely opposed to that NISDOT plan, so I think there's almost no chance of that happening. And my one question at the moment right now is the Citizen and Stately Apartments the first properties that Vism will have retail spaces?
No, I mean, we own some, for new construction, yes, but, we own where Oy's Deli is right now. So
right.
we do have like some ground floor retail.
Right. Well, I would just hope that you're committed to finding good tenants and retaining them, just to make the area active, give it an active use and keep it vibrant.
Yeah, I mean, we've always believed that ground floor retail is an amenity, and it helps the rentability of the rest of the building. I mean, like, to me, it's wild, it's the vacancies in College Town, and, like, if your tenants can walk downstairs and go to, like, a really good coffee shop or a really good sandwich place, that helps people actually want to rent the building. So, and it helps retain people. So, I mean, just from, like, a philosophical standpoint, it makes sense to have good tenants that are going to stay there long term.
Okay. Not seeing any others. Todd, did you have something?
Yes, I guess the question will be for Todd is more on policy. Just the last meeting we just had with the development meeting, we asked that the kitchen people for that feasibility study. When do we ask people? Is it normal practice? I'm just nothing with Todd here. Just when you see projects like this come up, any projects, when do you ask for a feasibility study? It seems like, because on that one project it was $150,000. We're going to give the kitchen to try to create more jobs and companies, and we asked for, we're paying $8,000 for a study to do that feasibility study. And then I look with the total tax abatements here of 3.765, 600, and we're not asking for a feasibility study. So it's not this particular project, it's just like any of these projects.
Well,
when do we?
Heather does a financial analysis, essentially the same thing a bank would do, to make sure that the incentives that the IDA would provide are the difference maker, that they're necessary to the project, that the project wouldn't get built differently or otherwise. But if there were particular aspects of the project where we weren't sure about something else, I guess we could ask for a feasibility study or some sort of study, but that's essentially what we do, is what Heather does.
Yeah, we used to hire a third party to do them until Michael was comfortable with me doing it many years ago. I'm happy to have a third party do it. It's a lot of work. But in any case, I do that on all of the housing projects that require the financial need incentive. I have had some discussions over the years with several chairs of the IDAs about doing a market study for housing projects. However, we have a countywide housing needs assessment that pretty much says we need housing at every type, price point, size, et cetera. And from experience seeing all the projects go up downtown, they're full before they're open. So that says there's market for them. The Ithacan right now is supposed to open in August. They're 70% leased today. So we don't require that market study. If, the market changes or there is no longer a needs assessment at the county level that says you need this, that may change.
Deborah.
Yeah, I think the other thing we need to remember is, in the case of the kitchen, we're kind of investing. And so we're doing a feasibility study to determine whether we're making a good investment. When Vism or another developer comes in here and talks about plunking down 7 figures on a development, that's their money, including their investor group's money. And so I think we can pretty much assume they've done their own feasibility study, or they wouldn't be taking that chance. I think there's a difference between the two situations.
That reminds me, I did have one more question, which is there was a comment about this initially being workforce as the price point, and it's gone to full market. Did you originally want to do this as a workforce housing project?
Yeah, I mean, originally, yes. I would push back. It's definitely not a full market rate project. I mean, you look at the price point between this and like the Ithacan and other stuff that's getting built downtown, we're definitely well below that. I mean, we're trying to price it as efficiently as we possibly can. I think it's also going to be a lot harder. We're on the West End. We're not on the Commons. But yeah, I mean, I think when we looked at purchasing this a few years ago, we were in a very different market environment. Interest rates were very different, labor, everything. So, but it's definitely, I would not consider this market rate.
It's cheap compared to College Town.
I think we're averaging between like 100 and 120% AMI. We were originally trying to be at like 80 to 120. So it's creeped up a little bit, but I think we're well below market, in my opinion, so.
Okay. I was going to ask for a motion, but go ahead.
And this isn't for you, but just wanted to say for us, can we have, so to see the presentation, we had more information than we had here. So for instance, the rentals, the layout of the property and the design of the building.
Use your mic.
So for the presentation here, we had extra information, for instance, the layout of the building, the rentals, the rental prices. So can we have these presentations included in our agendas next time? Because this has happened before where we're getting extra information. And if they I'm assuming that wouldn't be a burden to give it to us a week ahead of time for most projects?
If I have them, if they're submitted, I include them.
Can we require that? Because
Well, we don't require that their presentation cover any specific thing, but I can ask, in the future if they're planning to give a presentation, if I put it in the agenda packet.
Yeah, I mean, just for
that.
Committees, we usually require that. I mean, they're giving us information at the last minute, and if they have it, I would like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to consider a motion to send this to public hearing? John?
So move.
Okay. Do I get a second? Duxon? All right. Discussion of the motion? Seeing none? Deborah?
Yeah, I do. I do have some discussion. I'm going to vote for this. And I somehow feel like I have to explain why. Because once upon a time, I used to come to all these meetings with Teresa and other people and complain about, affordable housing and parking and the nature of the community and a whole bunch of other things. And to some extent, I really don't like being on this board because you have to consider a broader spectrum of things, and you also have to consider the purpose, the statutory purpose of an IDA, which is not developing affordable housing. It's not zoning. Those are city things. Those are land use planning and land use regulation, and that's not our job. And from my perspective, what I look at is the difference between the Joe's Restaurant building sitting there being ugly and worthless, and, a housing development that's going to expand the number of housing units, which would hopefully reduce the price of some of the existing housing units, would improve the appearance and character of the neighborhood, and eventually what would add to tax base, which I really hate hearing coming out of my mouth, but there it is. So that's my explanation, and I'm sorry I've sold out to the dark side.
Welcome, brother.
We'll all roast in hell together.
Ann?
What Deborah said, plus I also like, to see that the city is on board with this is a big part of why I'm going to be voting yes for this, but also it's a walkable neighborhood. There are 2 grocery stores nearby. There's parks. There's the waterfront. There's there's trails right adjacent to this property. There's buses. So there's a lot of things, that are attributes, and I like the retail down,
And it's an all-electric building?
As long as it's not Starbucks in the first floor. So there's a lot of things that I like about that, and in having to weigh it all and getting deep into the details of this, I do appreciate it, and I will approve, vote to approve the tax abatement.
Okay, John. Excellent. Good.
I would just like to add, it's in the benefits memo. There were a lot of comments that there's no benefit to the community. In addition to the new property tax, just the impacts of the number of construction jobs that are going to be created, $14 million in direct payroll, and $26 million in local spending. That's the direct and indirect and induced spending as a result of having 150 construction workers on this project. So, that's benefit right there to this community.
Sales tax.
Yeah, I didn't do the multiplier on the sales tax, but the spending, if you've got $26 million in spending, that's pretty significant.
Jackson.
I'll note too that I've had constituents accuse the city of promoting supportive housing in that area. So West End Heights is adjacent. And there are 2 supportive housing projects in this photo right here, this rendering rather. And so I think it's also like a signal that I've always disagreed with them. I think it's an extremely walkable location. I used to work on the other block. So I disagreed with that assessment, and it's kind of a reinforcement that this is a desirable part of the city to live. The speed of Route 13 notwithstanding, which we'll work with the state to improve. In fact, we have a grant with them to improve. So I think it's kind of reasserts that this is still part of downtown and a place that we want to promote people to live.
I just wanted to comment, Todd, I see you got local labor there. You checked yes on that. That's good. Great to see. Thank you.
Well, as long as we're all weighing in, I'll just offer a few comments. One, that if we didn't do anything, if we left the Joe's building there, you're talking about over 10 years, $217,000 in property taxes. And if we go forward with this project, those taxes still get paid, and there's an additional $2.584 million of property taxes. The net benefit is pretty significant. We end up with more housing. We end up with energy efficient housing. There's all of the financial spin-off effects of having this happen. And while, we always talk about temporary jobs. Well, builders, contractors, their jobs are always temporary. They're building here and then they're building there. These are real jobs. And this will be a very big, salary payment to lots and lots of people for the duration of the construction. And that matters too. So I think this is a worthy project to send to public comment. And we'll get those comments and see where we go from there. But is there anybody else before we take, I believe it's.
I forgot to ask my regular question.
Yeah.
Will there be electric vehicle charging capabilities?
I think so. Julia?
Sorry, yes.
How many? Or will you have the infrastructure, laid out for however many you might need later?
I believe we have the structure for 2, but I'd be happy to revert back on an email if that's okay, to confirm with the information.
Sure, just looking at that, New York is looking at going 100% electric vehicles, so it would be nice if the infrastructure was there to add it later, at least.
I believe it is.
Yeah, and I will say, I think we've tried to advocate and push more for electric charging, and we previously got a lot of pushback from fire department for that. So.
From where?
Well, it was, Chief Parsons was really against any charging like that's in a parking garage because of the potential electrical fires and their, the difficulty of like getting, I guess, a fire truck in there to fight it. So we've had him push back on other projects and reduce the amount that we wanted to put in. So, but he's not there anymore, so maybe that's changed. So.
And that's part where the city maybe could require more, but that's up on them, yeah.
Well, maybe we could get more information on that before our follow-up meeting. I believe we have the resolution on the floor. I think John moved and Ann seconded. Any further discussion or comment? Are we ready to vote? I will call the roll. Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Todd? Yes. And the chair votes yes, and we have one abstention. So that'll go to public hearing, and it'll proceed from there.
Really appreciate it, everyone, and I'm really grateful that Julia's audio was able to work, because I was not prepared to do that presentation, so
Okay.
thank you.
All right, and
Thank you so much.
we are running out of time, but I did want us to proceed to the jobs report. Heather, do you want to give an overview?
I do. So what you have, and Ina did bring bigger copies of the full project report, and then along with that in your packet, there's a memo per our recapture policy. We do review all the projects every year. I will say that, you know, the state looks at jobs because it's a number that they can hang their hat on. All of us IDAs have really been trying to work with the state to bring home the message that there are lots of other benefits that IDAs provide in addition to jobs. But it is one of the metrics that we do look at in determining whether we want to apply our recapture policy. In terms of the memo that I provided, I just wanted to highlight some of those other benefits. Let's see. So for projects last year, we did have 59 active projects that all reported. That's the Be Nice to Ina first part of the quarter of the year as she gains all the project reports. Those projects had been approved between 2003 and 2022. 48 of them were under pilot in 2022. They paid over $4 million in new property taxes. Of course, we know the lion's share of that goes to the school districts. 15 projects were under construction. A couple of highlights, projects did report 2,264.7 jobs in 2022, and of those that reported, total payroll was over $165 million with an average wage of over $36 an hour. There were 15 solar projects representing 65 megawatts of renewable energy, over 1,630 new housing units. Almost 27% were affordable units. So, you know, this is a small board, lots of mighty projects that I think you should be very proud of. What I have done is provided in this memo, I had pulled out of the big chart those that have not yet met their job creation goals, and I provided a narrative for each of those projects with a recommendation in regards to continuing the pilot, terminating the pilot, or terminating and recapturing funds. I have made 3 recommendations to terminate pilots. The first one being AES Cayuga, that's the old power plant. They have since closed. It is not legal to have a pilot where you require them to pay more than they would if they were on the tax rolls. The value of that project is such that with a property that is no longer in operation, the value of that pilot the assessed value of the property is much less, and so the county assessor is actually billing them at what their value is rather than what the pilot would have been, because the pilot was all based on megawatts of energy and power and all of that. So it's just sort of a cleanup. Let's take it off of our books. It looks like we've lost 94 jobs. We did lose 94 jobs when they closed several years ago. We're never going to get those jobs back. The last time that we redid the pilot on AES Cayuga, and I will remind you the reason that we did pilots for the power plant was because there just aren't any comps with which to value them, and the value is what the base for the taxes is. So we had done this for several years rather than ending up in a legal battle every year like you might see with other power plants in other states. Just putting it under pilot. What we did when the last time we renegotiated it was we knew that they were going to be closing. The previous governor had said there's going to be no more power plants, no more coal burning power plants. So we had sort of given them a soft landing that over a period of years the value would go down unless thus their payments would go down. So I'm just recommending at this point, since they've been essentially put back on the tax rolls, that we would terminate that pilot. The transonic systems pilot, they are paying under pilot exactly what they would pay if they were not under pilot. We had put this in place as sort of what we called a wraparound. At the time, they were going to receive Empire Zone incentives. The state Empire Zone program was going to sunset, and everyone was unclear if they would still get their 10 years of benefit, which included a tax credit based on what they paid in property taxes. They actually got it. They got it for 10 years. I'm not sure why our attorney at the time put it under like a 20-year pilot. But there's like nothing to recapture. There's nothing to claw back. We didn't really provide any incentive through the pilot. They're paying what they would be paying if they were on the tax rolls. So again, let's clean it up. Let's take it off of our project list. And then the Lansing market was really a project of a number of community members out in Lansing that thought it was really important to have a local supermarket. And unfortunately, they just were not able to make a go of it, so they closed last fall. The building is vacant. It's currently for sale or lease. And so my recommendation is to terminate that pilot. I'm not recommending that we recapture. They went out of business. They, lost a lot of money over a number of years. And so, I think at this point, it's just best to put it back on the tax rolls and hope that we get a tenant in there. And I'm happy to talk about, my narrative on any of the other projects. I do notice that, there are projects that don't meet their job creation goals. I don't know that any of them are terribly egregious. I think if you asked the county today how many employees they'd have a year from now, and then came back a year from now and asked them how many employees they have, it probably wouldn't be exactly how many they thought they were going to have. We do have a very low unemployment rate in this community, which means that everyone who really wants to work is probably working. So it is hard to attract talent and to retain talent in this community. I think Borg-Warner has 40 open positions today. So recognizing that, there's some other outside factors that impact businesses, I'm not in a position to say that I think I'm in a position to say that I don't think that anyone overestimated their job creation at time of application. If there were a project that said, I'm going to invest $100 million and create 8,000 jobs, and they came back and 9 years later they had invested $5 million and created 4 jobs, I would be recommending that we terminate and recapture. But I think in good faith and talking to these companies and these businesses that they've really done, they're doing the best that they can. There's definitely some benefit to the new tax base that we've created through these projects.
Okay. John, were you moving a motion?
No, I wanted to ask some questions, but
okay. You were first. Go ahead.
So can we, with the Lansing market pilot, what is the actual impact of terminating that on the tax picture for that property? It sounds like the first two, there's basically no impact, right? Like what's happening now will continue to happen. We're cleaning up the paperwork. But the third one, you didn't really get it.
With the Lansing market, they're technically in default because there's nothing operating in the building, so it's probably good practice to terminate. My understanding in talking to the county assessor is that because the building is vacant, that the value will go down. It may not go down, to as low as where they were in their pilot schedule, which, yeah.
How far through their pilot are they? That's kind of older now, right?
I think we did an extension.
Yeah, there were a couple of extensions on it.
They got a huge solar project that's, I just saw paperwork on that that's being proposed for that site.
Oh, it's not where the Lansing Market is. It's on vacant land, the solar project.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you talked about, I thought you said AES.
Right, because that was originally a 2012 pilot, so they're, whatever.
And it was
11 years
extended
into
through
it.
2029.
Right. So do we know, like, their tax burden is going to be similar to what they're paying under the pilot?
Yeah, but the
Ish.
state comptroller is going to come back and say, why are you continuing a pilot on a project that is out of business? I mean, I think for transparency's sake, the IDA probably wants to terminate it.
Okay, all right. Could I get a motion on those three, and we can discuss from there? Ann, you move?
No, I had a question.
Well, can we put it on the floor, and then I'll take your question?
It was about adding another one, so if we could
Oh,
wait.
okay. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay. So wondering for number 1520 Thornwood, the Macomb project, that has been sold, the business has been sold for $230 million. That was sold in 2014. And they were able to reinvest in other startup companies, but not there, I presume not there, on that property, is that correct? Because it says that, that the last sentence, the property owner has since rented the remaining space and the remaining
Yeah,
space.
so Macom never owned the building. There's a private developer that owns the building, and they pass the taxes through to the tenants. So the tenants pay the property taxes.
So I'm wondering why would we want to look at, that was not the original intent of that.
Well, I think for
incentive, so why
many
would
of
we
the
continue that?
buildings in the tech park, the intent was to provide space for growing companies here, and not every one of them is going to stay. It's very risky for a developer to build a building with a, several $1 million clean room, and, companies, particularly those that are venture-backed, they come, they go out of business. They're not able to do proof of concept and actually be successful. So it's imperative in our community that we have this low-cost space and this flexible space so that companies can move in. We don't have any vacant industrial sites. We don't.
Okay.
So we couldn't attract a business here.
Okay.
To have a little bit of space,
Yeah,
I think
I'm
is
good.
helpful.
I didn't understand the background, but that
Yeah.
helps. Thank you.
Okay, John?
Well, that one's also not, that pilot is not actually changing their property tax according to the table here. Is that accurate?
What do you mean it's not changing?
Well, their taxes, if not exempt, are equal to their payment in lieu of taxes.
Oh,
Yeah, it doesn't show that they have any exemptions in 2022.
Yeah.
So for this particular property, the way the pilot is set up, it is frozen at, I don't know if it's 2017 or 2018 assessment, about $960,000, and it stays there. So that's what it's assessed at. It's frozen there, and it pays that taxes. So there's no, they're paying what it's assessed at, but that the pilot is freezing it. So the assessment doesn't change.
I would be very careful about that. The IDA doesn't actually set the assessment, but we set what the payment is based on. So the IDA, I guess, at that point had said the payment will be based on this dollar amount.
So it's frozen till 2030? Is that the? Okay.
And really, for Macom to move in there, that was Binoptics, which was a local startup company, got purchased by Macom out of Massachusetts. And for Binoptics to start up there, there was some significant investment in the lab space and the clean room space that was there, so that the landlord paid for and amortized over the term of the lease, which was through 2029.
And this is, just for clarity, this is, as I understand it, a different model, that we're not looking at a specific business. We are looking at the space and the capability to have it in our community. So, you think about Micron, having a clean room may bring some business here. If we didn't have the clean room, we'd have to build it from scratch. Right? Anyway.
I got one question. When I was talking about AES before, I think it's kind of premature if we were to terminate that pilot, because there's a big job that's going to be coming out there for 200, 300 megawatts, and they're going to sell that project. That's.
No, I agree with you, but I think that would be a new pilot.
I don't know why you'd stop this one now, though. Because someone's going to be gaining a lot of money.
This one was based.
When they sell this project, it's going to be a lot of money that we could be missing out on with the tax dollars.
That pilot was based on the generating capacity of the power plant. That's going to be entirely different, and there's going to be new investment, capital investment in the solar farm. I'm comfortable with getting rid of this old legacy pilot, and we would do a new one. They're going to come to us, I would anticipate. So I'm okay with it. But I guess I would invite a motion to terminate those 3 pilots. John moves, Deborah seconds. Any further discussion on the motion? I'll call the roll. Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Todd?
No.
And the chair votes yes. So that passes. We get rid of those. I do note we are just past 4 o'clock, which is, as I learned, our actual time to end the meeting. We do have a little bit of additional discussion, I think, to have on this jobs report and the local labor waiver report, and we've got some minutes, and we were, Heather and I were having a discussion about perhaps going to executive session to discuss a litigation matter. If there's, what's the will of the IDA and our executive director on extending the meeting, or do you want to push this off to our July meeting?
I'm fine with doing it now.
I finished the business.
You need to
before.
leave, Heather?
I need to leave at 4:30.
Oh,
Me too, or sooner.
well, we've got
25
25 minutes. Let's go
Let's
as
make good use
far
of
and
it.
as fast as we can go. Let's continue the discussion on the jobs report. Further comment, Todd?
Yeah, I'd like to know, before we do anything with this, I'd like to know if any of these people have gotten COVID relief money for their businesses.
I'm sorry, what?
COVID relief money.
Which,
Yeah, because if you look in the paper, like you see like McGuire car dealership, they got millions in relief money from the COVID stuff. And I'd like to know if any of these people, before we forego any of these, I'd like to know if these people receive, some of them got some pretty substantial monies back because of COVID.
before we forego any of what?
Before we forego any of these pilots,
The 3 that we just voted to terminate?
Well, yeah, those 3 I wish we wouldn't have, yeah. But I'm looking at these other ones here too, when we're talking about not recommending taking action.
Well, the action would be recapture, to undo the pilot and seek to start collecting taxes.
Terminate, you could terminate without recapture.
Yeah, and I guess my view is that we've just been through a chaotic mess with the COVID pandemic. Some of them, I would think some of them did get relief money, but I also think that we're seeing the ancillary impacts, that they haven't been able to find employees and they haven't fully recovered. So I wouldn't have a lot of appetite in general to go after these businesses to try to recapture or terminate. If there was a specific instance where a company was not meeting its requirements or was, as I think Heather mentioned, way off on its job predictions, and there seemed to be bad faith, I think there would be reason to act. Here, I don't see that. I see this as our general economic condition.
Yeah, these companies have made the investments that they said they were going to make, and have, in many cases, have simply just open positions that they're unable to fill. the companies that got COVID relief funds, many of them are now struggling with the fact that really only deferred the inevitable, and they're trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces and get themselves back in line. I think, I don't think that that's something that we should really meaningfully consider and take some kind of action on. That would only be making things far worse for these companies that are trying to make it work.
Okay.
Further comment on the jobs report? Deborah?
I know we're in a hurry, but thank you. I thought it was a very thorough report, and I appreciated it.
Okay, yes, thank you. This is a lot of work to put before us, but it really is a great snapshot of where we are at this moment. I hope that next year, when we look at it, that the jobs numbers look very different, and I think they probably will. It seems like things are trending in the direction we want. I guess we could go into recession and we could have lots of trouble, but hopefully we don't. But at any rate, let's move on. I do not have a chair's report. Staff report, local labor waiver report.
So per our construction labor policy, any project that's coming in for a waiver that's an administrative waiver, our policy has specific things in it that say they're administrative. Our staff are to report to the IDA when we're granting those administrative waivers. So I have two for the City Harbor project. One was lack of qualified local bids or available workers, a need for specialized skills not available locally. For the rough framing, there were no local bids. They did solicit several local bids. And then the second one for a need for specialized skills not available locally, that was for the exterior package. There were 16 solicitations sent out. They received 14 bids, and due to the size and scale, only one contractor who was not local could do the work.
I was never contacted by anybody.
The City Harbor, I have the letter that City Harbor sent to you.
No, they never sent me a letter.
Notifying them of notifying you of the project. I have it in my file.
The only letter I got was telling me that a project was coming. No one ever told me anything about, couldn't find manpower,
And
or
that's
couldn't find a
what the,
contract. I've never received that.
I'm sorry, Todd. Let me just clarify. Our construction labor policy requires that they notify you, because you're the head of the Trades Council, that they will be receiving an incentive and they will be having a project.
No, I
So we
never
have
heard that
been
they couldn't find any
asked
labor.
several times. We've been asked several times by
never heard
several
this.
Take turns.
contractors, do you have a list of local contractors? We've reached out to all the unions
They do.
and asked them to provide us with a list. We have lists from all the unions that have hundreds of contractors that are located all over New York
I'm not
State
talking
on
just
them.
unions. I'm talking
we
any
provide
local labor.
Let her finish. I'm going to give you a turn.
But, we do not maintain a list of local contractors, nor had we felt like we had the capacity to do that. So, we have a policy. Our job is to ensure that the policy is followed. So, we're trying to do that within the extent of
Okay.
what we've done.
Okay, so Todd and then John.
I did not get this letter. I would say we have to amend this policy from now on, that we have to, I guess we got to do certified letters to make sure I'm actually getting these letters. I was only contacted one time by the guy with, who did the Cugamed project. And I put him in contact, guy never heard another word. But no, I did not hear anything. All I'm hearing from from all the contractors out there, I'm hearing that a lot of people don't want to touch these jobs because they're not getting paid because of disasters. The DeMarco project, for one particularly.
Okay.
But
So, the policy simply states that they are to solicit local bids. They provide us proof of who they solicited bids from. We get a list of all the subcontractors that they solicited bids from and who they received them from. With Reedman on this project, it's the first one to go through the policy. So they've had a lot of conversation with Kurt on my team back and forth to make sure that they're following the policy. So what I'm doing here is I'm simply reporting that we have received the backup documentation and a request for a waiver, and it was administratively granted based on the information that was provided.
I'm just saying, I've received nothing.
Can we get these reports in writing in our packets? It seems like it would be helpful for us to have. I mean, it's like hard to come up with any meaningful questions to ask when it's just.
Well, I'm just reporting, it's an administrative waiver.
Right.
It's administratively done. So there's no room for me to make any determinations. I'm not asking for the IDA's approval. I'm happy to report something in writing. This is the first time that I've done this, and, it's going to be a process for all of us.
Okay.
If you want something in writing, I mean, I can send this around. This is our waiver form that we've put together to track all of the waivers. I'm happy to put it in the packet every month.
Yeah, if you could, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it does seem like we have an issue with confirming notification. And we should think about how we can do that better, that we make sure that those notifications are not just sent but received. That seems straightforward.
Just a couple of dollars, yeah.
Yeah. And that could be a change to require certified letters, return receipt. Or, I guess we could follow up, or I say we, your office could follow up when you get the letter from the developer that you contact the same address to make sure that they did get it.
The policy requires that the head of the Building Trades Council is contacted, which is Todd, and his address and his title is in the policy.
And they never contacted me.
Yeah, we've heard it.
Never.
I will go back and.
that's
Pretty
wrong.
upset about that.
If that's the case, it's wrong.
Pretty upset.
Yeah.
Anyone could make up something, a letter and said that they sent it to somebody. I've never received anything, and I hope you take my word for it. I've never received nothing.
I will follow up with them and ensure that you are notified.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think there's an improvement we can make there. All right. Anything further on the local labor waiver? It's unfortunate. Let's take care of some administrative stuff. I have minutes from May 10th, 2023 board meeting. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes? Ann moves, Deborah seconds. Questions or comments on the minutes? I'll call the vote. Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. We do have time if we want to go into executive session. This would be for the purpose of discussing litigation that the IDA is involved with. Could I get a motion on that, John? Jeff seconds. All those in favor of going into executive session? All right, we'll do it on a show of hands. I do not anticipate we'll be taking any action after executive session, and we'll take a short recess to shut down the live feed. But we need to keep our council